The bridge of the horizon's edge hummed with the usual sounds of deep space patrol. Captain Jake Morrison sat in his command chair, watching the stars drift past on the view screen. His coffee had gone cold an hour ago, but he didn't care. 3 months into a 6-month patrol of the outer rim, and nothing had happened except equipment checks and endless reports. Linda Hayes sat at the tactical station, running her fingers through her short brown hair as she stared at the sensor displays. Roy Bennett was below in engineering, probably tinkering with something that didn't need fixing. Chris Palmer and his Marines were in the gym, staying sharp for a fight that never seemed to come. "Captain," Linda said suddenly, her voice tight, "I'm picking up something strange." Jake sat up straighter. "What kind of strange?" "A signal. Multiple frequencies, all broadcasting the same thing. It's not human, sir." Linda's fingers flew across her console. "The computer is trying to decode it now, but the language is completely unknown." Jake stood and walked over to her station. "Where's it coming from?" "The Kelthera system. About 6 light-years from our current position." Linda frowned at her screen. "Captain, this signal is weak. Really weak. Like whatever is sending it doesn't have much power left." The computer beeped and a garbled voice filled the bridge. The words were alien, clicking and whistling in patterns that hurt to hear, but underneath the strange sounds there was something else. Fear. Desperation. "Keep working on the translation," Jake said. "I want to know what they're saying." Roy's voice crackled over the intercom. "Captain, I'm seeing the same thing down here. That signal is using every frequency they can manage. Someone really wants to be heard." 20 minutes later, the computer finally broke through enough of the language to give them something useful. The voice that came through the speakers was high-pitched and trembling. "Please, and anyone, we are the Valari of Kelthera. Under attack. The Kresh came 3 days ago. They are taking our people. We have no weapons, no defenses. If anyone can hear this, please help us," and the message repeated over and over. Each time the voice sounded weaker. Jake felt his jaw tighten. He'd been a soldier before he became a captain. He'd seen what happened when the strong preyed on the weak. "Linda, pull up everything we have on the Kelthera system." "Already on it, sir." Linda pulled up a star map. Kelthera is a moon orbiting a gas giant. According to our long-range scans from 6 months ago, it had some kind of settlement. No military installations detected at the time. "And the Kresh? Do we have anything on them?" Linda shook her head. "Nothing in our database. We've never encountered them before." Jake tapped his finger on the armrest of his chair. The Horizon's Edge was a warship, but she was old, retrofitted from a colony transport 20 years ago. Against an unknown enemy, they could be flying into a massacre. But that voice on the recording kept playing in his mind. "Get me Chris Palmer," Jake said. A minute later, Chris appeared on the bridge, still wearing his workout gear. The Marine commander was a big man, all muscle and scars from a dozen campaigns. "You rang, Captain? Listen to this." Jake played the distress call. Chris's expression didn't change, but his eyes went hard. "How many ships do we think the Kresh have?" "Unknown," Linda said. "But based on the power signatures, I'm detecting at least 3 large vessels in orbit around Kelthera. 3 against 1. Chris crossed his arms. "I've had worse odds." Jake looked at his crew. Linda was young, brilliant, but this would be her first real combat. Roy was a genius with machines but hated violence. Chris and his 30 Marines were professionals, but 30 soldiers couldn't win a war. "Sir," Linda said quietly, "we should call for backup. Send the distress call to Fleet Command and wait for reinforcements." "That'll take 3 weeks minimum," Chris said. "Those people don't have 3 weeks." Jake knew Chris was right. He also knew that starting a fight with an unknown enemy could end very badly. Earth had only been in space for 50 years. They'd colonized a dozen worlds, built a small fleet, but they were still new to this part of the galaxy. First contact protocols said to observe, report, and wait for orders. But those protocols were written by people who'd never heard a mother begging for someone to save her children. "Roy," Jake said into the intercom, "how fast can you get us to Kelthera?" There was a pause. "If I push the engines hard? 18 hours. But Captain, if we're going into a fight, I need to know now. I'll need to reroute power to weapons and shields." Jake took a breath. Once he gave this order, there was no taking it back. "Do it, combat status." "Linda, send a message to Fleet Command. Tell them what we found and what we're doing." "Chris, get your Marines ready." "Yes, sir." Chris was already moving toward the door. Linda turned in her chair. Captain, are you sure about this? We don't know anything about the Kresh or the Valari. We could be starting a war. Someone already started a war, Jake said. We're just picking a side. The horizon's edge turned toward Kelthera and accelerated. Down in engineering, Roy worked miracles with the aging engines, squeezing every bit of speed from the old girl. Chris gathered his Marines in the armory and began checking weapons and armor. Linda worked at her station, trying to gather any information she could about what they were flying into. Jake sat in his chair and watched the stars. He thought about Earth so far away, about the green hills and blue oceans, about how humanity had clawed its way up from the dirt to reach the stars. They'd fought every step of the way, against nature, against each other, against a universe that seemed determined to kill them. Maybe that's what made humans different. They didn't give up. They didn't abandon people who needed help. Even when the smart thing to do was walk away, something in the human heart said no. Not today. Not while I can still fight. The distress call played again, quieter now. The voice was fading. We're coming, Jake said to the empty bridge. Hold on. We're coming. 18 hours later, the horizon's edge dropped out of faster-than-light travel at the edge of the Kelthera system. Immediately, alarms began screaming. Linda's screen lit up with contact markers. 3 ships in orbit around the moon, she reported. They're big, Captain. Each one is twice our size. On the view screen, Jake could see Kelthera. The moon looked peaceful from a distance, green and blue. But sensors showed something else. Fires burning in the settlements, ships dropping to the surface and rising again, their holds full of cargo that was alive and screaming. Weapons hot, Jake ordered. Let's show these Kresh what happens when they pick on someone smaller than them. The horizon's edge charged forward, and the galaxy was about to learn what Deathworlders do best. The Kresh warships hung in orbit like sleeping predators. Each one was massive, covered in dark armor plating that seemed to absorb light. Weapons bristled from their hulls, and their shields shimmered faintly against the black of space. They hadn't noticed the horizon's edge yet. They were too busy with their hunt. Jake watched the tactical display as one of the Kresh ships fired a beam down at the surface. It wasn't a killing shot. The beam hit near a settlement, close enough to terrify but not close enough to destroy. Herding fire, pushing the prey where they wanted them to go. They're toying with them, Linda said, disgust in her voice. Not for much longer. Jake leaned forward. Linda, I need targeting solutions on all 3 ships. Priority is their weapons and engines. Roy, how are we looking on power? Roy's voice came through the intercom, calm despite what they were about to do. Weapons are at full charge, Captain. Shields are holding at maximum. The old girl is ready to dance. Chris, you and your team standing by? Locked and loaded, sir. Just give us a ship to board. Jake studied the enemy vessels. In a straight fight, the horizon's edge would lose. The Kresh had bigger guns, stronger shields, and more armor. But Jake hadn't survived 3 wars by fighting fair. Linda, launch a spread of sensor drones toward the Kresh ships. Make it look like debris from a damaged ship. Yes, sir. Linda's fingers moved across her console. A dozen small objects shot from the horizon's edge, tumbling and spinning as they drifted toward the enemy. The Kresh didn't react. Why would they? Space was full of debris, rocks, ice, broken satellites. A few more pieces of junk meant nothing. The drones drifted closer, closer. When they were 100 meters from the nearest Kresh ship, Jake gave the order. Activate. The drones exploded with electromagnetic pulses, invisible waves of energy that slammed into the Kresh vessel. Its shields flickered and died. Systems went dark across its hull. Inside, the crew would be scrambling, trying to figure out what just happened. Now, Jake shouted. All weapons, fire. The horizon's edge opened up with everything she had. Railguns mounted along her spine fired solid slugs of metal accelerated to a fraction of light speed. They crossed the distance in seconds and punched through the Kresh ship's armor like it was paper. Explosions blossomed across the hull. Atmosphere vented into space. The ship began to list, powerless and bleeding. The other 2 Kresh vessels reacted instantly. Shields strengthened. Weapons swiveled toward the human ship. Energy beams lanced across space, brilliant and deadly. Evasive. Jake gripped his chair as the ship jerked hard to port. One beam missed by meters. Another grazed their shields, sending power levels fluctuating. Return fire. Don't let them get a lock on us! Linda worked her console like a musician playing an instrument. Missiles streaked from their launchers. Point defense guns tracked incoming fire. The horizon's edge twisted and spun. moving in ways the big crash ships couldn't match. Roy pushed the engines past their safety limits, giving them speed and maneuverability at the cost of burning through fuel at an alarming rate. Another spread of missiles hit the second crash ship. These weren't explosive warheads. They were fusion bombs, miniature stars that detonated against the shields with enough force to light up the darkness. The shields held, but barely. "Captain," Roy called out, "I'm reading something strange from the crash ships. They're sending out transmissions. I think they're calling for help. Can you block it?" "Already on it." "Jamming their frequencies now," Jake smiled. "Good. Linda, bring us around for another pass. Target the second ship's weapon systems." The Horizon's edge curved through space, her railgun spitting death. The Kresh tried to track her, but their targeting computers weren't built for an enemy that moved this fast and this aggressively. Humanity had learned to fight in 3 dimensions, in the chaos of atmospheric combat where every second mattered. The Kresh fought like they expected their enemies to stand still and trade blows. They were learning a hard lesson about assumptions. The second Kresh ship lost its main weapons in a series of controlled explosions. The third ship, seeing 2 of its companions disabled in minutes, began to turn away. "They're running," Linda said, surprise in her voice. "Not on my watch." Jake pointed at the screen. "Chris, you wanted a boarding action? That ship is yours. Linda, disable their engines." "With pleasure, sir." A single railgun slug perfectly placed shattered the fleeing Kresh ship's main drive. The vessel lurched to a halt, momentum carrying it forward but with no way to accelerate or maneuver. Chris and his Marines were already moving. They piled into boarding pods, small armored craft designed to latch onto enemy ships and cut through the hull. It was dangerous work. If the Kresh had point defense weapons still working, the pods would be sitting ducks. But the Kresh were panicking. Their sensors had never seen combat like this. Their tactical programs had no response for an enemy that ignored all conventional rules of engagement. The boarding pods crossed the gap unopposed and slammed into the Kresh hull with magnetic clamps. Inside the lead pod, Chris checked his rifle one last time. His Marines were crammed around him, 30 humans in powered armor, breathing recycled air and ready for violence. "Remember," Chris said over the squad channel, "we don't know what these Kresh look like. We don't know how tough they are. So we hit hard, we hit fast, and we don't stop until they surrender or die. Clear?" "Clear, sir." The cutting torch activated, burning through the Kresh hull. Atmosphere hissed out, freezing instantly in the vacuum. Then the breach was open, and Chris led his Marines into the unknown. The interior of the Kresh ship was dark and cold. Emergency lighting cast everything in a red glow. The corridors were wide, designed for creatures larger than humans. Chris moved forward, his rifle up and ready. The first Kresh soldier appeared around a corner, and Chris got his first look at the enemy. It was tall, maybe 7 feet, with 4 arms and gray skin covered in bony plates. Its face was all teeth and black eyes. It carried a weapon that looked like a rifle merged with a spear. The Kresh roared and charged. Chris put 3 rounds through its chest. The creature stumbled but kept coming. Tough. Chris put 5 more rounds into its head, and it finally went down. "Armored targets," Chris shouted. "Aim for the head and keep firing." More Kresh poured into the corridor. The Marines met them with overwhelming firepower. Automatic rifles chattered. Grenades detonated. The narrow space turned into a killing ground. And the Kresh learned that humans had been fighting in close quarters since they lived in caves. On the bridge of the Horizon's edge, Jake watched the tactical feed from Chris's helmet camera. The Marines were pushing deeper into the ship, leaving dead Kresh in their wake. The enemy soldiers were strong and tough, but they weren't prepared for the sheer aggression of human infantry. "Captain," Linda said, "I'm picking up transmissions from the planet's surface. The Volari are cheering." "They can see what we're doing," Jake nodded. "Good, let them see. Let the whole galaxy see." 30 minutes later, Chris and his Marines had fought their way to the Kresh bridge. The ship's commander, a massive Kresh with scars covering his armor, stood waiting with a dozen guards. Chris didn't bother with words. He tossed a flashbang grenade into the room and charged in right behind it. The fight was brutal and short. When it was over, Chris stood over the Kresh commander, his rifle pointed at the alien's head. "Tell your ships to stand down," Chris said. He knew the alien couldn't understand him, but his meaning was clear. The Kresh commander looked at the dead guards, looked at the humans standing in his bridge, barely scratched and ready for more. He made a clicking sound and touched a panel on his console. On the view screen, Jake watched as the surviving Kresh ships began powering down their weapons. "We did it," Linda said, almost whispering. "We actually did it." Jake leaned back in his chair. They'd won the first battle, but this was only the beginning. The galaxy had just learned that humans existed, and they'd learned it in the worst possible way. There would be consequences. But right now, down on Kelthera, people were alive because of what they'd done. That was enough. "Good work, everyone," Jake said. "Now let's go meet our new friends." The dropship shook as it entered Kelthera's atmosphere. Chris Palmer stood in the back with 20 of his Marines, holding on to the overhead rail while the ship bucked and rattled around them. Through the small windows, he could see smoke rising from multiple points on the surface. The Kresh had been busy down here. 2 minutes to touchdown, the pilot called back. "I'm reading Kresh signatures all over the main settlement. They've got ground troops herding civilians toward transport ships." Chris checked his rifle again. Old habits. "Listen up. We're going in hot. The Kresh on the ground don't know their ships are disabled yet. They're going to fight. Our job is to hit them hard enough that they don't have time to hurt any more civilians. Sergeant Collins, your team takes the east side of the settlement. I'll take west. We squeeze them in the middle." Amy Collins nodded, her face serious behind her helmet visor. She was tough as nails and had been fighting since she was 18. If anyone could handle this, she could. The dropship hit the ground with a thud. The rear ramp dropped, and Chris led his Marines out into hell. The settlement was bigger than he'd expected. Buildings made of some kind of white stone with curved roofs and large windows, beautiful in an alien way. Or it had been. Now half the structures were burning. Bodies lay in the streets. The air smelled like smoke and something else, something chemical that made his nose itch. "Move," Chris shouted. The Marines spread out in practiced formations, moving through the streets with weapons ready. They'd gone maybe 50 yards when they found their first Kresh. The alien soldier was dragging a Valari by the arm. The Valari was small, maybe 4 feet tall, with fur like a deer and large eyes filled with terror. It was making high-pitched sounds that didn't need translation. It was begging. Chris didn't hesitate. He put a round through the Kresh's head. The alien dropped, and the Valari scrambled away, disappearing into a damaged building. Contact left. Someone shouted. A group of Kresh soldiers came around the corner, 5 of them in heavy armor and carrying those rifle spear weapons. They saw the humans and roared, charging forward. The Marines opened fire. The Kresh were tough, their armor absorbing the first few hits, but sustained fire brought them down. One got close enough to swing its weapon at a Marine. The blade cut across the soldier's armor, leaving a deep scratch but not penetrating. The Marine responded by putting his rifle under the Kresh's chin and pulling the trigger. "Keep moving," Chris ordered. "Don't let them group up." They pushed deeper into the settlement. More Kresh appeared and more died. The aliens were strong and their armor was good, but they fought like they expected their enemies to be afraid. They charged forward, roaring and swinging their weapons, trying to intimidate. Humans didn't intimidate easily. Amy's team hit the east side of the settlement and ran into heavier resistance. A Kresh transport ship was landed in the main square, its cargo bay full of captured Valari. Kresh soldiers stood guard while more aliens herded civilians up the ramp. "We need to stop that ship," Amy said over the radio. "If it takes off with those people, we might not get them back." She looked at her team. 6 Marines, good soldiers, all of them, against maybe 20 Kresh and a armed transport. Bad odds, but they'd faced worse. "Jackson, Peters, you're on me. We go for the transport." Everyone else suppressing fire on those guards. The Marines opened up and the Kresh scattered. Some took cover behind buildings. Others charged toward the gunfire. Amy and her 2 soldiers sprinted across the square, using abandoned vehicles for cover. A Kresh soldier stepped out in front of them. Jackson shot it twice in the chest. It stumbled but didn't go down. Peters hit it with a grenade that detonated at its feet, finally dropping it. They reached the transport and Amy could see the Valari inside, pressed together and terrified. Some were bleeding. All of them were crying. "Get them out!" Amy shouted. Jackson and Peters moved to the cargo bay while Amy covered them. A Kresh pilot appeared in the transport's doorway, raising a weapon. Amy was faster. The pilot fell and Jackson was already helping the first Valari down the ramp. The civilians poured out, running in every direction. Amy let them go. Better scattered than captured. Across the settlement, Chris's team had found something worse. A building that the Kresh were using as a collection point. Inside were dozens of Valari, sitting on the floor with their hands bound. Kresh guards stood over them, weapons ready. Chris made a quick decision. Flashbangs, then we go in hard. Don't hit the civilians. The grenades went through the windows. Bright light and sound filled the building. Chris and his Marines burst through the doors, firing controlled bursts. The creche guards went down in seconds, caught off guard and blinded. One of Chris's Marines, a young man named Danny Price, who served as their medic, immediately went to the Valari. He cut their bonds with his knife, speaking softly even though they couldn't understand him. The Valari stared at the humans with wide eyes. These creatures were terrifying, all covered in armor and carrying weapons that roared like thunder. But they'd killed the creche. They'd freed the prisoners. One Valari, braver than the others, reached out a trembling hand and touched Danny's armored glove. Danny smiled behind his helmet and gave the alien a thumbs up. The Valari didn't know what it meant, but the gesture seemed friendly. We're getting transmissions from all over the settlement. Linda's voice crackled over Chris's radio. The creche are pulling back. I think they're trying to regroup. Good, Chris said. Let them regroup. We'll hit them again. The battle for the settlement continued for 3 more hours. The Marines moved from street to street, building to building, clearing out creche soldiers and freeing Valari civilians. It was hard work, dangerous work. 2 Marines were injured, one seriously when a creche got lucky with a blade. But Danny kept them alive, working under fire to patch wounds and inject painkillers. By the time the sun set, the settlement was secure. Over 2,000 Valari had been freed. The creche ground forces were scattered or dead. Their transport ships sat empty and abandoned. Chris stood in the main square watching as Valari families reunited. The aliens were crying, hugging each other, making sounds of joy and relief. Some approached the Marines cautiously, touching their armor and weapons with gentle hands, as if they couldn't quite believe these violent warriors were real. One Valari, older than the others with gray in his fur, walked up to Chris. He was tiny compared to the armored Marine, barely coming up to Chris's chest. But he stood straight and looked Chris in the eye. The Valari said something in his clicking language. Chris didn't understand the words, but he understood the tone. It was thanks. Deep, heartfelt thanks. Chris removed his helmet, letting the alien see his face. He held out his hand. The Valari looked at it, confused. Then carefully he reached out and placed his small hand in Chris's large one. They shook. Human and alien, warrior and survivor. You're welcome, Chris said quietly. Around them, more Valari were approaching the Marines. Some brought food, simple offerings of fruit and bread. Others just wanted to touch the humans, to reassure themselves that their rescuers were real. Amy walked over to Chris, her helmet under her arm. She had blood on her armor, none of it hers. Hell of a first contact, sir. Chris laughed, tired and relieved. Yeah, not exactly how the textbook said it would go. Think we're in trouble? Probably, but I don't care. Look at them. Chris gestured at the Valari. They're alive because we didn't follow the rules. I can live with that. Above them, in orbit, Jake watched the scene through a surveillance drone. The Valari settlement was secure. His people were safe. The creche were defeated, but he knew this was just the beginning. Somewhere out there, the creche who'd escaped would be reporting back to their superiors. They'd tell them about the humans, about what had happened here, and the galaxy would react. Jake just hoped humanity was ready for what came next. The message reached the creche Dominion 3 days after the battle. A single badly damaged ship, limping through space with half its crew dead and the other half traumatized. The ship's commander stood before the Dominion Council, a group of high-ranking creche who ruled their empire from a fortress world deep in their territory. Unknown species, the commander reported, his voice shaking. They call themselves humans. They came from nowhere. Their ship was small, old, but their weapons. Their tactic? He paused, struggling with the memory. They fought like nothing we've ever seen. No hesitation, no fear. They boarded our vessels with soldiers who seemed to enjoy the combat. The council members looked at each other. The creche had been expanding for 200 years. They'd conquered dozens of species, enslaved millions. No one had ever stood against them like this. How many ships did they have? One council member asked. One. Just one ship. Silence filled the chamber. One ship had defeated 3 creche warships and liberated an entire settlement. It seemed impossible. Find out everything about these humans, the council leader ordered. Where they come from. How many ships they have. Their weaknesses. And prepare a battle fleet. We will make an example of them. While the Kresh planned revenge, word of the battle spread across the galaxy at faster-than-light speeds. The Valari, overjoyed at their rescue, transmitted everything they'd recorded. Video of the space battle. Audio of the Kresh screaming as human marines tore through their ships. Images of human soldiers standing among freed prisoners looking like armored angels of death. Other species watched and wondered. Who were these humans? Where had they come from? In the galactic hub station known as Unity Point, representatives from hundreds of species gathered to discuss this new development. The station was neutral ground, a place where even enemies could meet and talk without violence. Ambassador Kellen of the Tarathi arrived first. The Tarathi were an old species, wise and careful. They'd been spacefaring for over 1,000 years and had seen countless young races rise and fall. I've reviewed the footage from Kelthera, Kellen said to his fellow ambassadors. These humans are remarkably aggressive. Their tactics are unsophisticated but effective. They favor close-range combat and seem to have little fear of death. Barbarians, sniffed Ambassador Yenna of the Cassian Empire. The Cassians were wealthy and powerful, controlling a dozen star systems through trade and diplomacy. They attacked without provocation, without even attempting communication. The Velari were under attack, countered Ambassador Tor of the Benari Coalition. The Benari were warriors themselves, though more disciplined than humans appeared to be. The humans responded to a distress call. That shows honor. The debate continued for hours. Some species saw humans as potential allies. Others saw them as a threat that needed to be contained or eliminated. But everyone agreed on one thing. Humanity needed to be contacted officially before more incidents occurred. On the horizon's edge, Jake was having his own debates. The ship orbited Kelthera peacefully now, with the captured Kresh vessels nearby under marine guard. Chris and most of his team were still on the surface helping the Valari rebuild and establishing a defensive perimeter in case more Kresh arrived. Captain, Linda said, pulling Jake from his thoughts, we're receiving multiple transmissions. Different languages, different species. The computer is working on translations, but sir, everyone knows about us now. Jake had expected this. You couldn't blow up alien warships and expect to keep it quiet. What are they saying? Mixed messages. Some are thanking us for helping the Valari. Some are demanding we leave Kresh territory immediately, and several species are asking to open diplomatic channels. Linda paused. Captain, one transmission is claiming to be from something called the Galactic Council. They want to meet with us. The Galactic Council? Apparently it's a loose alliance of the major spacefaring species. They want to discuss humanity's sudden and violent emergence into galactic affairs. Jake rubbed his tired eyes. He was a ship captain, not a diplomat. What does Earth say? Fleet Command sent a message 6 hours ago. They're dispatching the Defiance Wake with additional ships and a diplomatic team. ETA is 2 weeks. Until then, we're ordered to maintain position and avoid further conflicts. Avoid conflicts, Jake repeated. Right. Because that's been going so well. A new transmission came through, and this one made Linda sit up straight. Captain, this one is from the Kresh Dominion. It's marked as official communication. Put it on screen. The view screen flickered and a Kresh appeared. This one was different from the soldiers they'd fought. It wore elaborate armor decorated with symbols, and its black eyes held cold intelligence. Human vessel, the Kresh said, the computer translating its clicking speech. I am High Commander Vektash of the Kresh Dominion. You have committed an act of war against our people. You destroyed our ships, killed our soldiers, interfered with our lawful operations. Jake stood up. Your lawful operations involved attacking a peaceful species and kidnapping civilians. We responded to a distress call. The Valari are within Kresh territory. They are ours to do with as we please. You had no right to interfere. We have every right to protect innocent people from slavers and murderers. Vektash's expression didn't change. Probably couldn't with that alien face. You speak of rights, but you know nothing of galactic law. Nothing of how things work among the stars. You are children playing with weapons you don't understand. We understand them well enough to kick your teeth in, Jake said flatly. A temporary victory. You had surprise on your side. That advantage is gone now. The Dominion is assembling a fleet. 12 warships, human. They will arrive at Kelthara in 10 of your days. And they will teach you the price of interfering with the Kresh. The transmission cut off. Linda looked worried. 12 ships, Captain. We barely handled 3. I know. Jake sat back down. Get me a channel to the surface. I need to talk to Chris. While Jake dealt with threats from the creche down on Kelthera, something remarkable was happening. The Valari had never seen warriors like the human Marines. They watched in fascination as the soldiers moved through their settlement, setting up defensive positions and teaching the Valari how to use basic weapons. Danny Price, the medic, had become particularly popular. He'd set up a medical station in one of the larger buildings and was treating injured Valari with supplies from the dropship. The Valari brought him their wounded, and Danny worked tirelessly to save them. One young Valari, barely more than a child, watched Danny work with wide eyes. The child had been injured during the creche attack, a deep cut on his leg. Danny cleaned and stitched the wound while speaking softly, his voice calm and reassuring even though the Valari couldn't understand the words. When Danny finished, the child touched his face gently, then made a sound like a purr. Danny laughed and ruffled the child's fur. An older Valari watching this approached Amy Collins. The Valari had been studying the humans, trying to understand them. These creatures were clearly designed for violence. Heavy bones, dense muscles, forward-facing eyes like predators. But they showed such gentleness with the wounded and the young. The Valari pulled up a display on a small device showing images and data. Amy looked at it, confused at first. Then she understood. The Valari was showing her information about Earth. The device classified Earth as a Class 12 Deathworld, the highest classification, a planet where everything seemed designed to kill: high gravity, extreme weather, aggressive predators, diseases that could wipe out entire populations. The Valari looked at Amy with something like awe, realizing that humans had evolved on one of the most dangerous planets in the known galaxy. "Yeah," Amy said, even though the alien couldn't understand. "Earth is rough, but it makes us tough." The Valari seemed to understand the tone, if not the words. It made a gesture that might have been respect or maybe fear, probably both. That night, Jake called a meeting in the Horizon's Edge briefing room. Chris had come up from the surface, leaving Amy in command of the ground team. Roy was there, looking tired from keeping the ship running at combat readiness for days. Linda sat at the table, her fingers drumming nervously. "The creche are sending 12 ships," Jake said without preamble. "They'll be here in 10 days. Earth is sending reinforcements, but they won't arrive for 2 weeks, which means we're going to be facing that fleet alone." "Can we win?" Chris asked. "Honestly, I don't know. We got lucky last time, caught them by surprise. But they'll be ready for our tricks now." Roy leaned forward. "We could run. Get the Valari to evacuate and leave the system before the creche arrive." "Where would they go?" Linda asked. "This is their home, and the creche would just hunt them down later." Jake nodded. "We stand and fight. But we're going to need help." "From who?" Chris asked. Jake smiled grimly. "From the Valari themselves, and from every other species out there that's sick of the creche pushing them around. It's time to show the galaxy that humans don't fight alone. We fight with anyone brave enough to stand beside us." The next 10 days passed in a blur of activity. Jake sent messages to every species that had contacted them, explaining the situation. The creche were coming with overwhelming force. The Valari would be enslaved or killed, but if other species joined the fight, they could send a message that would echo across the galaxy. The age of the strong preying on the weak was over. Most species ignored the message. A few sent polite refusals, saying they couldn't risk war with the creche Dominion. But 3 species answered the call. The Benari sent 2 warships, sleek vessels built for speed and precision. Ambassador Tor himself came aboard the Horizon's Edge to meet Jake. "My people respect courage," Tor said. He was tall and thin with blue skin and 4 arms. His species had been warriors for centuries. The creche have terrorized smaller species for too long. It's time someone stood against them. The Torathi sent 1 ship, but it was commanded by Ambassador Kellen himself. "I'm too old to fight," Kellen told Jake over the communication channel. "But my crew is young and eager, and I can provide tactical advice. The creche fight in predictable patterns. We can exploit that." The biggest surprise came from a species Jake had never heard of. The Ven arrived in 3 small ships that looked more like cargo haulers than warships. Their representative was a stocky creature named Gris who spoke in a deep rumbling voice. "The creche destroyed my home colony 20 years ago," Gris said. "Took my family. I've been waiting for a chance to hurt them ever since. These ships might not look like much, but we've modified them. We can fight." Down on Kelthera, Roy and the Volari engineers worked together to build orbital defense platforms. The Volari weren't warriors, but they were clever with technology. They showed Roy tricks with energy shields and power distribution that human engineers had never considered. In return, Roy taught them about kinetic weapons and the beauty of simple, brutal efficiency. You don't need fancy energy beams, Roy explained through a translation device. Sometimes you just need to throw a big rock really, really fast. The Volari seemed skeptical, but they built the railgun platforms Roy designed. When the first test firing sent a metal slug through a small asteroid, reducing it to dust, the Volari made sounds of amazed approval. Chris and Amy worked with the Volari on the ground, teaching them basic combat tactics. The Volari would never be warriors like humans, but they could defend their homes if they had to. More importantly, they could evacuate civilians if the battle went badly. On the 8th day, the Defiant's wake arrived early, pushing her engines past safe limits to get there faster. Commander Peter Briggs was a veteran of the colony wars, a hard man who'd seen more combat than he cared to remember. He brought 200 fresh Marines and enough weapons to arm a small army. "Jake Morrison," Peter said when they met in person for the first time. "I've heard a lot about you in the last week. You've caused quite a stir back home." "Sorry about that, sir," Jake said. Peter laughed. "Don't be. Someone needed to show the galaxy what we're made of. Might as well be you." He got serious. "But we're in for a real fight now. 12 Kresh warships against what we've got? Those are bad odds. I've had worse." "Liar," Jake grinned. "Yeah, okay. These are pretty terrible odds. But we've got good people in a good position, and the Kresh are arrogant. They think we're just primitives with stolen technology. That's an advantage we can use." The day before the Kresh fleet was due to arrive, all the Allied ships gathered in orbit around Kelthera, the Horizon's Edge, the Defiant's Wake, 2 Binari warships, 1 Tarathi vessel, and 3 Ven cargo haulers converted into makeshift gunships. 9 ships against 12. Still bad odds, but better than before. The defense platforms were positioned around the moon, hidden among the orbital debris. Chris and half the Marines were on the surface with portable anti-ship weapons. Amy commanded the other half aboard the Defiant's Wake, ready to board enemy ships if the opportunity arose. Jake stood on the bridge of the Horizon's Edge, looking at the tactical display. Every ship was in position. Every weapon was charged. Everyone knew their role. Now they just had to wait. "Captain," Linda said quietly, "are we going to win this?" Jake thought about lying, about giving her false confidence, but she deserved better. "I don't know. But we're going to fight like hell. And even if we lose, the galaxy is going to remember what happened here. They're going to remember that humans don't abandon people who need help, that we stand and fight no matter the odds." "That's not particularly comforting, sir." "No, but it's the truth." The Kresh fleet arrived exactly on schedule. 12 massive warships dropped out of faster-than-light travel and immediately began scanning the system. They found the Allied ships waiting for them and seemed almost amused by the small force. High Commander Vektosh's face appeared on every view screen. "So the humans found some allies. It won't matter. You are outnumbered and outgunned. Surrender now, and we will only enslave your species. Fight, and we will exterminate you." Jake didn't bother responding. He gave a simple order. "All ships execute Attack Plan Alpha. Show them what we've got." The defense platforms activated first, firing railgun slugs from unexpected angles. 2 Kresh ships took hits before they could react, their shields flickering under the kinetic bombardment. The Allied fleet surged forward, moving in a coordinated attack that Kellen had designed. The Binari ships went high, the Ven ships went low, and the human vessels punched straight through the middle. The Kresh had expected a traditional battle, ships trading fire from a distance. Instead, they got chaos. The Allies used every dirty trick they could think of. Mines disguised as debris, electronic warfare that scrambled sensors, missiles that changed course at the last second. Peter's ship, the Defiant's Wake, lived up to its name. It carried heavy weapons that hit like a hammer, punching through Kresh shields and armor. The Binari ships danced around the enemy, their precise weapons taking out specific systems. The Ven ships, ugly and ungainly, proved to be tougher than they looked, soaking up damage while their improvised weapons caused havoc. But the Kresh were learning. They adapted to the tactics, stopped falling for the same tricks. Their superior numbers began to tell. The Tarathi ship took a direct hit that penetrated its shields, killing half the crew. One Ven ship exploded, its reactor overloading under sustained fire. "We're losing," Linda said, her voice tight with stress. "3 of their ships are breaking off. They're heading for the surface." Jake saw it on the tactical display. 3 Kresh warships diving toward Kelthera, planning to bombard the settlements. If they succeeded, all of this would be for nothing. "Chris," Jake called over the radio. "You've got incoming." On the surface, Chris watched the Kresh ships descend. They were huge, blocking out the sun. Around him, Marines and Volari manned the anti-ship weapons Roy had helped them build. Missiles, railguns, even some Volari energy weapons they'd modified for more punch. "Wait for it," Chris said calmly. "Let them get close." The Kresh ships came in low, arrogant, and confident. They thought ground forces couldn't hurt them. They were wrong. "Now," Chris shouted. Everything fired at once. Missiles streaked into the sky. Railguns sent solid slugs through the atmosphere. Energy beams lanced upward. The lead Kresh ship took the full barrage and its shields collapsed. Follow-up shots punched through the hull. The ship began to list, trailing smoke. The other 2 Kresh ships pulled up, suddenly wary. They hadn't expected this kind of resistance from the ground. Chris's forces kept firing, making it clear that approaching Kelthera would be costly. Up in space, the battle raged on. Jake's ship had taken damage. Sparks flying from consoles and hull breaches sealed by emergency force fields. Roy was performing miracles in engineering, keeping the weapons powered and the engines running. But they couldn't keep this up forever. Then something unexpected happened. A new ship appeared on sensors, dropping out of faster-than-light travel. Then another. Then 5 more. "Captain." Linda's voice was filled with shock and joy. "It's Earth Fleet." They sent more ships, but that wasn't all. Ships from other species were arriving too. The battle footage had spread across the galaxy. Hundreds of species had watched humans and their allies fighting desperately to protect the Volari. And some of them, inspired or shamed into action, had decided to help. 20 new ships joined the battle. Not all of them were warships. Some were merchant vessels with improvised weapons. Some were exploration ships with nothing but their determination. But they came, and they fought. The Kresh fleet, suddenly facing 3 times as many opponents, began to panic. Their formation broke. Ships tried to flee, only to be cut off by fresh arrivals. Vektash's voice screamed over the communications, ordering his ships to regroup, but it was too late. The tide had turned. 2 hours later, it was over. 5 Kresh ships were destroyed. The others had surrendered or fled. The Allied fleet hung in orbit, battered but victorious. On the surface, Chris and his Marines stood among the Volari, watching the debris fall from the sky like shooting stars. Jake sat in his command chair, exhausted. His ship was a mess. Half his crew was injured, but they'd won. They'd actually won. Peter's face appeared on the screen. "Hell of a fight, Jake, hell of a fight." "Yeah," Jake managed a tired smile. "We did good." Over the next few days, more ships arrived, diplomats, scientists.